of certain types, but by and large, this whole period has been a period of high political stability and globalization. Now, looking at globalization, which is part of the subject matter of my title, globalization is integration at the global level. It's been going on since 1945. That's a kind of post-war World War II almost hegemony in part of the world of the United States, what was called sometimes the West, but in a world that did not include the Soviet bloc and China. And then the globalization began after China in 1978 or 1980 joined the world economy, and then after the Cold War ended, when the Soviet Union and the Comecon bloc joined the world economy. So to a very large extent, the whole world was together and globalization could continue. It's almost associated with the Pax Americana of the single superpower. Historians use the term the Pax Britannica of the late 19th century, this period when Britain was a kind of superpower with the British Empire. Maybe not in the same sense the United States is a superpower, but it was certainly the most prestigious and most advanced power. And people talked about gunboat diplomacy and things like that, and British battleships keeping a kind of Pax Britannica. Now we have a Pax Americana. I think if you might not like that term, you might resent it in some ways, but if you imagined what would happen to the world if the United States were by some magic obliterated or shot off into space, how many countries would want to invade other countries? Who would stop the world? This is a big problem because we don't have a system of governance in the world that has enough military bite to be an alternative to the United States. The entire world is now involved in globalization except Cuba, North Korea, Myanmar, Iran, and Venezuela. Maybe Iran and Venezuela shouldn't be counted in that, and maybe North Korea, we're on the brink of a new regime with possibility for the first time. I was in Korea last week, the possibility of integration of the two Koreas. So it's very hopeful that we're going to get even more complete globalization than we've had before. Means globalization proceeds by openness, the natural state of the world. It has many dimensions: economics, politics, cultural, social, religious, and military integration. It always involves integration. Here is the way I was putting the thoughts together about how these have played out in the past 150 odd years. We don't need to discuss them much. I'm just because they're even rather tentative, but trying to think in each of these directions how the different types of globalization in different time periods has become important. If we look at this last part, the last line, I put them all as high. Now, maybe I shouldn't, because you might say, well, religious integration, is that high? Well, at least in terms of knowledge, it's very high. There was a time when 100 years ago, I would put it low in the 1960s, people wouldn't know what in the North America much about what Buddhism is or what Taoism is or the other ideas. Knowledge was not very spread, but now knowledge is so high that integration is automatic. It doesn't mean that people agree on each other. There's a fragmentation and there's hostility and there's fanaticism and so on, but there's still integration in a sense of knowledge of it. Each dimension, globalization, has to be achieved depending on the type of country and type of government, type of religion. Every country is different, and every country reacts to this external fact of globalization in a different way. And then even if you get kind of equilibrium degree of globalization. As in trade, you have an equilibrium degree of tariffs. We have very low tariffs in the world today compared to 50 years ago. We're really close to a free trade era to a large extent today. But even if we get to a certain level of integration by a high degree of free trade, then it can be shocked by new technology. New technology upsets the whole pattern, changes the implications. Look at the way in which the IT revolution has affected all our lives. And so I wouldn't be sitting here today talking or traveling around as much as I did. Couldn't do it without the IT revolution, which is the computer I'm looking at now and the access to knowledge and so on. Look at these revolutions that have gone on in the past: gunpowder, printing press, science and technology, steam power, electricity. After every revolution, there's a new framework, and it changes the balance of power in the world, because some countries benefit, others are impeded by different changes in technology. The terms of trade change. We have nuclear power. Today we have computer and IT powers. So how much every country has to determine how much they want. Extreme degree would be free movement of goods and factors, technology, information, and money, amounting closely to economic union. And some countries go to that. Some countries move toward economic union. Europe has moved a high degree of economic union, and with the euro area, even monetary union. But most countries stop short of this. And one thing that they very much stop short of is particularly the movement of people across borders. Every country has immigration controls and quotas that impede that degree of integration. So integration takes place more by trade and then by exchanges of ideas. But even that's limited a little bit, because countries, sometimes ideas may be bad ideas. Maybe people don't like some Hollywood blockbusters, the types of things, or jazz, so there are restrictions put on things because they might be harmful in one way, either politically or morally or in some other way. Cultural diversity is something that people want, and we have to accept, because we have different religious systems, different moral values, and so all countries can't do the same thing. The same rules don't work for all countries. Different geography positions. The landlocked countries are in a different position with respect to globalization. Some countries don't globalize because they're too far away economically from the world to globalize. You look at some countries inside the center of Africa. You look at a country like Mongolia, maybe Nepal, maybe some. These integration. It means something quite different. Of course, airplanes reduce the danger and the limitations of landlocked countries. Now, bringing coals to Newcastle, talk about something about the economic model and the sufficiency economy. A stereotype of the economic model is based on individual self-interest, individuals maximizing utility within the framework of the market economy. Selfishness, economic selfishness, carried to as an extreme. Rational men make choices which make them better off. That's what it means. This was the model used in Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Adam Smith didn't think this was exactly that man was selfish. What Adam Smith wanted to do was to examine the role of selfishness in economic models, and show what he was able to show was that there's at least a silver lining to selfishness, because the basic idea that man moving around pursuing his own selfish interests would in the long run benefit the public interest. It's the idea of maximization of society as a whole. Now, Smith himself wrote 15 years before The Theory of Moral Settlements. That book was entirely about altruism and what sympathy meant, the doctrine of extended sympathy, of how people, we would call empathy probably, how they look upon the others. So he was, there are two models. It's a different model of how they look. The economic man is a selfish maximizer. But Smith, as I say, published that Theory of Moral Sentiments, a great book, and it's examining altruistic sentiments. And the complete man, the actual man, is a mixture of those two things. The man is choices within the family, within the kinship group, and neighboring group is different from man outside the family in the marketplace, operating for selfish interests. Now, the Majesty's philosophy advocates growth. This is what I've seen from this, advocates growth with economic stability. So growth, but growth with economic stability. Sustainable development, but sustainable development. Sound economic macro policies, and the equitable sharing of the benefits of economic prosperity. That's what we could read from the discussions of this. It eschews excessive risk-taking, untenable inequalities, and the wasteful use of natural resources. Now, this is not per se inconsistent with a good economic model, but it adds to it some motives that complement the economic man. These are empathy, compassion, fairness, and generosity. It treats the human being as evolving rather than static through learning, ethics, perseverance, and tolerance. The triad involves moderation, wisdom, insight, the middle way between want and extravagance. Reasonableness, knowledge, integrity, and honesty, which includes understanding of the consequences of actions, not only in the present but in the future, not only on ourselves but on our fellow humans and societies. And the third involves resilience to risks, self-immunity to withstand shocks, and reserves against shortage. So, policies. The sufficiency individual, if we can think of that phrase. Sufficiency man, I'm using man to mean all humanity, is the economic man with empathy, compassion, fairness, and generosity built in. This model of the economic actor is not incompatible with economic development and globalization, nor is it incompatible with free enterprise and economic growth. Sufficiently macroeconomics, national policies should take account of the sufficiency triad. Countries should maintain enough reserves against shocks. Countries should take account of the effect of their policies on their neighbors and the rest of the world. Actions are to some extent reciprocated, and overly aggressive actions invite retaliation. So it's also good actions, good behavior is often in self-interest behavior. Global interdependence is increased by the innovations in transportation and communication. It's greater than ever before. Global interdependence we see this everywhere. When every international discussion, we see we can't avoid global independence. Overuse of energy bids up the terms of trade against other countries. Changes in tariffs and quotas affect other countries' terms of trade and employment. Sharing of fishing, wildlife resources, preservation of endangered species, rainforests, problem of global warming, all elements of interdependence. The international business cycle is transmitted from one country to another. People are asking about, we've had this great year, but is the next year going to be poor? Is the U.S. economy going to slow down? Is that going to reduce exports from Thailand? Is it going to create a beginning of a crisis? How serious is it? Are we going to weather this? The balance of payments of one country has its equal and opposite counterpart in the rest of the world. I mentioned earlier the $900 billion deficit means that the rest of the world has a $900 billion surplus, and they get those assets and liquidity instruments that provide for that fuel economic growth. No country has an exchange rate to itself, and we spend a lot of time in international goods talking